Joining me now, outside the White House, is NBC Chief Justice and National Affairs Correspondent Kelly O'Donnell. Kelly, every day there's something new with this story, and we saw some of the president's reaction to it and then the pushback from the administration. Tell us, what is the mood like inside the White House, and what is the White House saying about Pam Bondi's role in all of this?
Well, it has been a tumultuous timeline as we look at how the president's responses have adjusted from frustration at his own base of support, his MAGA world, frustration, even disbelief as he voiced it, not understanding why people are interested in it, to anger, claiming that Democrats have manufactured some of this. Critical for our viewers to know, the Epstein death and his 2019 indictment happened while President Trump was in office the first term some years ago. And now, of course, these matters are back in the control of his team. There has been a sense of frustration about how to deal with this. Certainly, there have been kind of rolling disclosures in terms of what was said publicly, in what the expectations were, not material, but the expectations that a lot would be delivered publicly. And then, of course, the Attorney General, through a systemic review of all the available material, had made the determination that there would be no further public disclosure. And then now we're at a point where we are anticipating some motion being filed with the judge responsible for the grand jury. That's one slice out of that voluminous file, that a judge would review the arguments made by the government about whether what is typically secret material, investigative material, grand jury transcripts, if any of that should be made public based on the weighing of the cost-benefit. There are still victims. There is still Ghislaine Maxwell's appeal process. So it's unclear when this will happen and what the outcome will be.
And it's interesting, too, because the president's been trashing his supporters. He claimed this whole thing's a Democratic hoax all week. Knowing that this article was coming, and he clearly knew based on his response, is there any indication why the White House went that route with requesting this of Pam Bondi?
I think the president is reflecting a broad comment that has come from not only his base, but elected officials, even the Speaker of the House, even his former running mate and Vice President Mike Pence spoke about this. Nikki Haley talked about a lot of prominent figures in both mainstream Republican circles, conservative voices, and people with big megaphones on the internet and in their own programs and podcasts, and the base. Asking for more, and the president finding a way to try to split the difference, to accuse Democrats of mishandling this. Again, we've already explained that isn't necessarily anything that can be backed up. And if there is more, and he's used words like what is credible, what is pertinent, that could be made public. We may not see any of that made public based on the fact that it is not just the president or the attorney general's power. Now, they do have more power on investigative files. But again, it's been the practice of the Department of Justice, and certainly courts don't like to release grand jury information. But other things like FBI files and so forth could be released if they chose to. But they have made it clear that they don't believe there are incriminating other factors that would result in prosecutions of others, and they're concerned about the impact on very real victims that were involved in these schemes. Okay,
Kelly O'Donnell at the White House. Kelly, thank you for that. Joining me now is Jeremy Saland. He's a criminal defense attorney and former district attorney in Manhattan. He's going to try and help us make sense of the legal aspect in all of this. So, Jeremy, when President Trump talks about releasing all pertinent grand jury testimony, kind of break down for us, what sort of information would that entail?
This is really just a ruse, and you are going down not you personally, but the public is somewhat going down a rabbit hole and chasing his own tail. And what I mean by that is the evidence that people want, this witness list, would not be a product of a grand jury subpoena and would not be protected by a grand jury secrecy. It would likely have been obtained, if not in fact obtained, by way of a search warrant. A search warrant would not be protected, and the materials from a search warrant would not be protected, like for example, bank statement that was subpoenaed with a grand jury subpoena to the grand jury. There was nothing preventing, really, the Department of Justice to release this witness list if it exists in this letter, because, again, it would not have been secured pursuant to a grand jury subpoena in a grand jury. This is really a farce to distract from the storyline, to say, hey, I turned over or tried to turn over and a judge shot me down. And that's simply not true.
And is this something that ever happens? I mean, how often does a grand jury unseal transcripts like this? Would there ever be a legal reason for something like this to happen?
Certainly would be. For example, if there was needed as part of a criminal investigation, you hear about it if there's some military issue, or even on tribal land, there's a court proceeding or something that needs to pull that sealed information out. But we look at historically, and there's a Second Circuit decision not too long ago from the 90s, I believe it is, but you hear from Richard Nixon historically saying, let's get some of this evidence out that was sealed. The danger to the public doesn't exist anymore. The secrecy is not necessarily that important as it used to be. The Rosenbergs, that conspiracy case from espionage case from a long time ago, historically. So there is a precedent. But again, that's not, we're being asked to move the ball. The evidence that the public wants to see of this witness list is not protected by the grand jury and likely would never have been presented into the grand jury.
So is it your belief that if you truly wanted full transparency in this matter, the grand jury would not be the route to go? Who would be, or where I should say, would the route take us? Who should we be asking for this?
His first name is Donald and his last name is Trump. And he is the person who can say to the Department of Justice, it's in that file, share it. He's not going to do that. He's going to blame a judge. But I'll close with this piece that's important. If you're investigating, which you were at Epstein, for trafficking these young girls or anyone, it's not the Johns and all the people that allegedly use that service that would be part of that grand jury proceeding. It really wouldn't be relevant. It's not there. Honesty and truthfulness is, if it exists, which people believe it does, then Donald Trump needs to man up and release it.
So what you're saying is that the release of this information, not only will it not provide the information that we're looking for, that it could potentially serve as a cover for him. He could say, here's everything I've given you, but in reality, the actual stuff you're looking for isn't in this tranche?
Right, but it's also realistic that the judge is going to say no because you have witnesses who are alive still. And unless some of the witnesses may have shared some of their story, and then you could say, well, you know what? The danger to that person doesn't exist because there was a civil litigation or they've shared it in the press. And I'll release some of it. But the information that the public is demanding and some of his base really wants, it's not likely there. It wouldn't be in the grand jury because it's not relevant to whether or not Epstein committed these crimes for which he was indicted. That material, which has been secured from a search warrant or shared some other way, would be in a file that the Department of Justice could release with Donald Trump's A-OK.
Yeah, and then you mentioned the legal aspects that could be associated with this, that could lead to a judge saying, no, you can't release it. I mean, we have Ghislaine Maxwell's case. That's on appeal right now before the Supreme Court.
Right.
Could that be one of the reasons the judge will say, no, we're not going to comply with this?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, again, you want to maintain the secrecy, the protection, the integrity of that grand jury proceeding and all those witnesses, so you don't generally release it unless, for example, as we discussed before, there was a separate criminal proceeding, for example. But even if the judge agrees, you're not going to get what you want. And when the judge doesn't agree, Donald Trump's going to point and say, I try to do my job. I try to be honest and transparent. But this is anything but that, period.
Okay, Jeremy Saland, thank you for bringing it to us straight today. I appreciate it, as always.
My pleasure.
Joining me now for more on the fever around the Epstein story is Charlie Warzel, a staff writer at The Atlantic, who wrote a great piece. His article is titled, Nobody, Not Even Trump, Can Control the Epstein Story. Charlie, thanks for being here. Without question, the president and his administration have hyped up the so-called Epstein files on the campaign trail, even after he took office. Having seen what's happened in the Oval Office and beyond over the past week, is there any way they can walk this back?
I don't think that they can, honestly. The Epstein saga, as the MAGA media world and Trump himself have played it up, is really deeply connected to the myth of Donald Trump that he has sold since before the whole, Epstein saga and before QAnon and all of that, which was this idea that he works for the people, that he is the sort of the servant of this, underserved and, class of people that have always been counted out, that, that want to see the elites brought to justice in this way. And this conspiracy theory, which is, again, part real conspiracy and part conspiracy theory, this speaks to his myth so much. This is something that people elected him to do, which was to give more transparency towards this, to maybe, take down this shadowy supposed cabal of elites. And the fact that he is the one obstructing this in some senses is he's the one telling his supporters still that, this is a hoax, that they're being played by the Democrats. There's something fundamental that he is pushing up against, and it's his myth that he has sold all of his supporters.
Yeah, and he kind of finds himself in a difficult spot here, because there is the possibility that there is no there. But he's the one who peddled this idea that the government was hiding something from everyone. So are we at the point now where, is there anything that they could release related to the investigation that would actually satisfy all these folks that have said for years that there's some big bombshell that we haven't heard yet?
I mean, this is what's interesting, right? I feel like, obviously, we don't know the future, and there could be some release of something down the line that actually does satisfy people, right? It opens up onto a conspiracy that's actually real and huge and goes all the way to the top, right? That probably wouldn't be good for Donald Trump, since he sits at the top of the United States government. However, I think that there is this, I think you're right, there's this part where I don't know if these supporters could be satisfied. I think whatever happens with this grand jury situation, as the expert before me just said, there's going to be a lot of difficulty around that. But even if there were to be some sort of list that does eventually get put out, I have a feeling, based off of other conspiracy theories that I've tracked, and there's nothing will satisfy a person who has tied their entire identity to this idea that a piece of information can be released out into the world, and then the entire world makes sense. The fact of the matter is, the world often doesn't make sense. There is often a lot of secrets and things that don't add up, and life can be very unsatisfying. And what a conspiracy theory does at its core is it really shrinks things down and simplifies the world. So I think that there is this possibility that even if these people were to get everything that they wanted, they wouldn't be satisfied by it. And that puts Trump in a really awkward position.
Yeah, and you write so eloquently about it in your piece, about these persistent conspiracies that really capture the attention of the public. And you've described it as in what you're calling late-stage conspiracism. I've never said that word before. Hopefully I said it right. Writing, quote, "All the anger may just be the result of an addiction to an information ecosystem that has conditioned people to believe and to expect a right to evidence that justifies any belief they might hold. To believe such a thing would suggest that there is epistemic rot, reality decay, and a culture of conspiracism are not byproducts of a specific politician or a political movement, but something deeper, something intrinsic to the platforms, culture, and systems that define our lives. It would suggest that the fever will never break." I talk to young journalists about this all the time, Charlie, this idea that we live in a current environment where people make up their mind first and then go in search of evidence to back it up. Is that part of why something like this manifests itself, and it's so impossible to stop this train?
Absolutely. And this is why I described the quote unquote, the Epstein files, the perhaps real, perhaps not real document, as this unstable compound, right? And all sorts of people, from, MAGA shock jocks to politicians, have tried to leverage it for their own personal gain, or to score attention points, or whatever it is, right? And it seems to blow up in everyone's face. And I think it's because of this idea of this justification. People have bought into this. For them, what uncovering the Epstein list means is a sense of true accountability. That, everything that is wrong in the world right now is based off the fact that these powerful, truly morally rotten and corrupt elites run the world. And if that were to be exposed, if they were to be brought to justice, everything would change. There are people who believe that, all debts would be forgiven, that we would have universal health care and all sorts of, wonderful governmental services if the elites were brought to justice. This is all tied up in some really thorny stuff that's glued to people's identities. And, it could be really difficult if they don't get what they want.
Yeah, I like the way you describe it. An unstable compound with a fuse that Donald Trump lit, and now seems to be surprised that it's blown up in his face. All right, Charlie Warzel, terrific report on The Atlantic. I highly recommend it.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.